Hi everybody, so good to be with you again, and I was really impressed with the information that you were able to get about beavers this past week. You were able to research some pretty good facts about them, and the two big questions that we're still considering are: how can a beaver be responsible for changing a whole ecosystem? And the second question, how can the beaver be responsible for starting the country of Canada? So the first question we had a pretty big hint about when you noticed how large their dams are that they build and their lodges. Today we're going to explore a little bit about the second question. How does the beaver start a country of Canada? And to help us look at that question, we are here at another one of my favorite spots to walk, and this is along the Fraser River, as you can see. And you all know this river because you drive over bridges like the Alex Fraser Bridge all the time and see this river. And I love to walk along here. This is Fort Langley, which has an excellent place to walk along the river. So we're in Fort Langley, and as you can see, there's actually a fort in Fort Langley, and people can visit it to this day. You're probably wondering, when was this fort built and why was it built? Well, it was built way back in 1827. That's 40 years before Canada became an official country. And why was it built? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back to Europe. And the people in Europe had built pretty fancy ships that were able to sail over the Atlantic Ocean. And so they sailed over and found this land here and thought, hey, maybe there's something valuable here like gold. So they looked for gold and diamonds and things like that, and they didn't find a lot of those things. But they did find something that was very, very valuable. And to tell you what that is, I have to show you a fashion picture from back in the early 1800s. This is about 150 years ago, and this is what the men's fashion was like in Europe. Notice the hats. These were considered so cool. They were cool because they were waterproof and they lasted a long time. They kept their shape. And guess what the hats were made out of? If you guessed beaver fur, you are right. And it was so fashionable that men were willing to pay a lot of money for these hats. The big problem was that Europe was running out of beavers to make the hats. So when explorers came to this land that we now call Canada, they found it populated with millions of beavers. Cha-ching! Fortunately for the explorers that wanted the beaver pelts, there were already people living on this land who were excellent, expert trappers. Those were the Indigenous people, the First Nations people, who had been living on the land for hundreds and thousands of years. So a trading business began between the Europeans who wanted the beavers and the Indigenous people who lived here already. Now, this was called the fur trade, and the fur trade was very, very important in Canada's history. So the Europeans would get the beaver pelts, load up their ships, and take them back to Europe and sell them for lots of money, and then bring their ships back to load it up with more beaver pelts. Now, there started to be a bit of competition between people who were wanting these beaver pelts. And so they tried to get the Indigenous people to trade with them. One company would say, trade with us, we'll take your beaver pelts. And another company say, no, trade with me, I'll give you this for your beaver pelts. And so there was competition, and after a lot of negotiations and stuff happening, one company sort of won out. And you may have heard of this company. Have you heard of the Hudson Bay Company? You might have seen the store, Hudson Bay store. I want to show you. I even have a blanket here from Hudson Bay. Tell me when. So you can see that this is a Hudson Bay blanket, and it's very similar to ones that they created way back in the 1800s as well. We often call Hudson Bay HBC, or we just say the Bay, and that is still a place that we can shop today. So the reason why they called it the Hudson Bay Company is that it started around the area of Hudson Bay in eastern Canada. And you can see here's Europe, and the ships would sail across the ocean and land at strategic points close to the Hudson Bay area, and that's where they would do their trade. But eventually they spread west, and more forts were built all across what is now Canada and the United States, including as far west as Fort Langley right there. So they would build these forts as a place that the Indigenous people could come and they could trade for the beaver pelts and other things too. So as Hudson Bay Company and others were setting up forts across this land, do you think that they asked permission from the Indigenous peoples that already live there? Actually not. Surprisingly, they asked permission from the King of England in order to set up the forts. And for a while, there was a bit of a fight. Who has this land, France or England? And they didn't even consult the Indigenous people at that point. So this is Fort Langley, and it's a historic site. It's also a place like a museum that you can come and explore. It's closed right now because of COVID, but when it reopens, you and your family could come here and take a look inside the fort. They also have people that are dressed up in the fashion of the day, showing you the jobs of the fort and the kinds of things that went on there. Like there was always a blacksmith there that was making things that they needed. There were people that were growing produce for cooking. There were chefs, cooks, security, people that made barrels. And you can see here, this picture kind of tells a bit of a story of what would go on at the fort. Looks like they're getting supplies. Supplies would have to come from Europe as well, carrying it up, pushing the barrels to the fort, getting what they need. You can see that there are some Indigenous people here also getting their wares to trade at the fort. So lots of stuff happening at the fort, and it would be a worthwhile place to visit. So I challenge you to take a look at the activity that's posted on Seesaw, and I'll look forward to reading what your responses are to that activity. Bye for now. Hey you, do you want to make a trade? Here, you want to trade something for this blanket? Like she's giving me a beaver. See you guys.